Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for Women in Law's second Power Lunch of 2025. I am Jennifer Banda and I'm the director of the Center for Women in Law here at the UT School of Law. At the center, we encourage and help law students and lawyers confidently build, navigate, and advance their careers. The center, through this Susan Blount Lunch series, exposes law students to prominent lawyers from a wide range of career paths for a thoughtful conversation on the speaker's legal career and career path. We also have a live stream component with practicing lawyers earning an ethics hour of CLE today. The ethics CLE information will be sent to you today after the lunch. And for those of you that are in the room, please make sure to sign in. So this series is named after Susan Blount. She was a founding member of the Center for Women in Law in honor of her generous gift of time and talent when she stepped into the role of interim executive director back in 2019. So this speaker series and other legal programming is only possible through the generous donation of our members. I encourage you to check out the Center for Women in Law website for future programs, and we would love for you to support the center. We'll happily take your online donations. So now today, let's talk about the main event. Becky Melton is joining us today. She is the Vice President of Legal for SolarWinds, an Austin-headquartered global IT software company. I'll read a little bit of your background, and then we're going to get a lot more into it today. SolarWinds is publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, but recently signed an agreement to be taken private by a private equity firm. This was after SolarWinds survived a highly sophisticated and unprecedented cyber attack in December of 2020. A single case by the SEC is pending, and that remains of the numerous legal and regulatory matters which had ensued. Prior to her current position at SolarWinds, Becky was an employment law director at Freescale Semiconductor, which is now NXP, vice president and general counsel at United Devices, which was a distributed computing startup that she spent a year with prior to the tech crash in the early 2000s. She spent 4 years here at the law school as the Assistant Dean for Alumni Relations and Development, and she spent the beginning of her career at Fulbright and Jaworski, which we all now know as Norton Rose Fulbright, and she was a member of the firm's litigation, appellate, and labor and employment section. So I think we'll have a great conversation today just about the interesting career path you can take as a lawyer, and also some really interesting conversations about what have been the experiences at SolarWinds. There's a lot to talk about there. So let's take it back a little bit. And tell us about yourself, your background, your college, and how you got to UT Law School.
So I grew up in Austin, and my father was a professor at the university in engineering, and so we spent a lot of time on campus, and he really, and my mother really encouraged us to go away to school. So my brother and I both went away for undergrad and then came back for graduate school. So I was always wanting to come back to UT after my time on the East Coast at Wellesley.
And you went to Wellesley,
I went to Wellesley,
yeah.
yes.
That is great.
Far away from Texas.
Yeah, understood. And then started UT Law in
1991.
94 graduate, correct?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about the time when you were here at UT Law, kind of what your interests were, what you were engaged in, and how you ended up at Fulbright.
So I was very excited to be back in Texas. I missed it more than I thought, and I had been at an all-women's college, and so being back at a co-ed environment was super fun. And I went out a lot and had a great group of friends here, managed to study also, fortunately. But I had a wonderful experience here. I thought it was a great balanced place to go to law school where you got a wonderful education, but there was also a lot of fun to be had in Austin and around the law school, and made great friends that I am still very close to today, and just really enjoyed the experience. It was special.
And for the law students that are in the room, what was memorable about your days at UT Law School? When you look back, what do you think about?
I mean, it's really the friends. I had a really fun time my first year meeting all the people in my TQ, playing flag football. I don't know if we still do that or not, but co-ed flag football was really fun, and going out afterwards. And I did mock trial and all those kinds of things that I think are still around. So was involved in school stuff too, but it was really about the people I met here and the relationships I made, I think.
Yeah, I think your class was particularly close. You all still get together. I mean, your relationships have sort of persisted over time, right?
They have, and they've even broadened the class below us. Also has a lot of alums in Austin, and so we actually have a Christmas party every year now with a mixture of 94 and 95 getting together, and it's up to like 50 people sometimes. It's really fun. So
And I think
those relationships really last.
And I think too, just for the students in the room, the benefit of that is not just the personal relationships, but there's such a broad array, I'm guessing, of just work relationships and how that plays out over time as you've been working through your career, to have the friends and the mentorships and the people you can talk to about those kinds of things. So.
Yes, for sure. They are personal friends, but also people that can help you with work things too.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And then from law school, your first gig out was into big law at Norton Rose. And so tell us about the practice and your time there.
So when I went to, it was Fulbright and Jaworski, which I was a litigator, and so I was very proud of the Jaworski in the name. And I went to Houston, and at that time, Austin was a really different place than it is now. It was kind of pre-tech, if you can imagine such a thing, and it was mostly government, and then there were a few things like CMTech and MCC that were kind of government business consortiums that were starting to nibble on the edges of tech, but the job market here was very different. And so I was headed for litigation and kind of thought I should go to the biggest and best litigation firm I could think of, and that seemed to be Fulbright at that time. They had an amazing litigation training program, which I'm sure they still do. And so it really prepared me well for the beginning of the practice.
And so that was 4 years, or is how? Or
I spent a year in Houston, and then I actually came back to Austin because the Austin office was expanding. Because it literally at the time that I got out was when all these changes were starting to happen in Austin. So that was a great time to be making the move back here. And I spent 7 years there.
Okay. Yeah.
Before I went in house for the first time.
And then from Fulbright, I outlined it a little bit in your in your bio. But take us through kind of how you navigated and changed your career as you, before you got to SolarWinds, because I think it's really interesting and tells a good story to the law students in the room and to all of us, about how you can continue to explore new paths and reinvent yourself in some ways.
I mean, I didn't plan out any of it, I'll just say. It just sort of happened. But I had a client that I was working with that was this startup through a personal connection. Again, you just never know where your relationships will take you. And it was somebody I'd grown up with. Her brother-in-law was starting this company, and they came to me for some work on nationwide sweepstakes law. It's a long story, but that was a big part of their business model, was having a sweepstakes, and it's a very complex area of the law. And so I got to know them, and they said they were having to talk to all these lawyers. These were engineers and finance guys, and they like didn't want to talk to the lawyers anymore, and so they hired me to help them. And I was an employment lawyer by that time, and so I helped them with some HR stuff too. And so that was United Devices, and that was a very interesting change from my 21st floor office at Fulbright or whatever floor it was to a folding table on Duval Road in North Austin. I think I was the 13th employee they hired, and that was fascinating. And I stayed for about a year and kind of could tell the company wasn't going to make it. And fortunately, had kept my relationships at Fulbright really strong and had left on good terms and ended up going back to Fulbright. I reached out to the couple of partners that I'd worked with there that I was really close to and said, I don't think this is going to work out. I think I'd really like to come back, and was fortunate to be welcomed back. And that was a good thing. So I got back in and did employment law for a little while then, and then got into appellate, trying to find something that would be a little more family friendly than litigation. And so that was kind of my second tour of duty at Fulbright.
And then after that, you went, where was?
So then I had my first child, stayed for a while doing appellate work, and actually was one of the first people to go into the Fulbright part-time program. That was brand new then. This was in the, early 2000s. And all the big firms were trying to figure this out and starting these programs and feeling their way. And did that for a while, had a second child, and then the wheels kind of came off for a while. She's sitting here. She's a sophomore at UT now. And so I decided to take a break at that point, and stayed home for a few years with the kids. Quickly figured out that I really missed working. And so again, I kind of pulled out my Rolodex, or whatever we call it now, contacts list on my phone, and again, talked to the partner I'd worked for at Fulbright, who I was very close to in the employment law section. And he had former associates kind of at every big tech company in Austin at that time, which was a great business model for him because it sort of ensured that he kept he kept clients that way. We were all very loyal to him. And there was an opening that was actually coming open at Freescale, it turned out, and there was another woman that I'd worked with at Fulbright who was in that job and was getting ready to move. He knew was getting ready to move to Samsung to be their local GC, and so I kind of finagled that and went in-house for the second time, and worked for a wonderful man named Larry Parsons, who was also a former Fulbright colleague, and he was the vice president for ethics and compliance and did sort of the executive level employment law there. And he just had a wonderful view of balancing family and career, and told me, don't miss any of your kids' preschool performances, take the time you need. And he always trusted me to get my work done and spend time with the kids' school stuff too. And so that was a wonderful balance. And then that role ended. Freescale was not doing so well at that time before they got bought by NXP. And he and I both left the company, and I took another break at that time. So.
And then you have several fans in the room here from your time at UT. So, I think you got a return to the UT Law School to get to do some work here working for the law school.
Well, and that was another work connection from Fulbright in Houston. I had worked for a wonderful man named John Beckworth when I was a clerk, who ended up leaving the firm before I took my permanent job offer, but we had stayed in close touch. And he was coming to the law school. He'd been doing litigation in Houston at his own firm for years, and had decided to take a job here as associate dean for strategy, I think was his title. And he was working with Dean Farnsworth, who was new to his role and from the East Coast. And so that was a little bit, different coming into UT Law School and all of its complexity and relationships. And so I talked to him about the alumni relations and development role, and ended up coming here because I was really tired from trying to balance practicing law and having little kids. It's always a struggle, and you just kind of do what you can when you can. And I was excited to just take a break and do something different for a little while. And so that ended up being a great experience, being back at the law school, seeing professors I'd had who were still here, meeting the new dean, and just getting to know how the law school worked nowadays. It was
and
really
from
neat.
a totally different perspective than what you see as a student, for sure.
It was really cool.
And then today, you are Vice President of Legal at SolarWinds, which is an Austin-headquartered global IT software company. For those of us who are not in technology or IT, which y'all should know I was not, Becky has sent me several articles that I have read, and it's really fascinating. So tell us, what is SolarWinds?
And I'm a history major, by the way, so everything that I'm giving you,
I know.
I'm not technical either. So SolarWinds is an IT software company. We make IT monitoring software. That's the simplest way to put it. Historically, it was something that was a pretty small purchase that could be bought by any IT professional at a given company. And so we had tons and tons and tons of customers that made small purchases, somewhere in the neighborhood of around 300,000 by the time I joined the company. Customers, yeah.
Wow. And then, so how did you get to be at SolarWinds?
Another networking story.
There's a theme here, which I think is important.
Always, yes, keep your friends from all your jobs. That was interesting. There was a woman that I knew named Melissa Garza, who was a wonderful HR person at Freescale, who I had been close to, and she was with SolarWinds. And I honestly can't quite remember how I connected with her. It may have just been on LinkedIn or something. And at that time, I had decided to go back to work and had joined a small boutique firm that my friend, who had been at Samsung as their GC for about 10 years, had joined. And she was starting up an employment practice there, and we kind of decided we should be outside counsel for companies that weren't big enough to have in-house employment lawyers. So we could sort of be fractional employment lawyers for smaller companies was the thought. And so I was, out trying to figure out who I knew where and get in touch with people, and had lunch with Melissa Garza because she was at SolarWinds, and she said that their employment lawyer was about to go on leave. And so she didn't know about them being a client, but did I want to cover for her while she was out on maternity leave? And I was a little surprised, to be honest with you, that they had an employment lawyer, because it was not that big of a company. I mean, Freescale had 25,000 employees when I joined it, and SolarWinds was more like 2,500, I think, at that time. But it was an interesting company because it was global with lots of offices, and so the footprint in terms of offices was very similar to Freescale, the company that was 10x the size. And really, in employment law, you get complexity from the number of offices you have, the number of countries you're operating in, much more so than the number of employees, because it's all the different countries and all the different laws that you're trying to keep up with that really make it tough. So I also reached out at that time to a guy named Jason Bliss, who is our GC and Chief Administrative Officer still, and he was in that role then. And I knew his father from Fulbright in Houston, because he was a partner there for years and years, and was this kind of larger than life figure. He was a POW actually for many years, kind of like the John McCain story, and so he was this almost mythical figure at the firm. And so I had met him and thought he was an amazing, interesting person, and just decided to reach out to his son on LinkedIn and go, hey, I met your dad when I was in Houston, and I'm starting up this practice, and would love to talk to you about it. And so eventually I connected with him, and so I was still at this firm, and I took kind of a seconded position almost for like 20, 30 hours a week with this tech company when their employment law director was out, and she never came back from her maternity leave. So I ended up getting offered the job and left the little firm, and took the role then.
And so that was in 2019.
Probably,
I
yes.
think, according to your bio and my notes. Yes. And so then in 2020, and so one of the articles that Becky sent me summarized what happened at SolarWinds in this way, and I thought it was such an interesting sentence, so I'm going to start with that, and then we'll talk about it certainly in your own words. But SolarWinds was the victim of the largest and most sophisticated cyber attack in history by a determined, patient, and capable threat actor, in what was believed to be the first instance a threat actor had injected malware into the software build process. It's like there's a lot in that just one sentence, but I think it captures it really well.
Yeah.
But in your words, kind of tell us what happened in 2020 and how all it went down.
Well, just to set the stage a little more about what a perfect storm it was, personally for me, we were, I had just been promoted to vice president at that time, which was going to be a broader role than just the employment law, and so I was kind of worried about how to manage all of that. And also, we were spinning off one of our business units that was about a third of the company into a separate publicly traded company, and that work had been going on for months before this December 2020 thing happened. That actually was, the IPO was the summer after the hack. So all that was kind of overlaying this. So there's a lot going on already. And then that morning in December, mid-December of 2020, I was sitting on the couch watching the Today Show and drinking coffee and trying to wake up. And this was the lead story with the news section, and I just thought, this can't be good. It's definitely not good. So that was
I better get to the office.
Yes. And I hadn't heard anything about it then, but our GC had sprung into action. It all hit Saturday morning, literally. The company found out Saturday morning. Did not know about it before then. And so there had been people up at the office all weekend long, basically 24 hours a day. And this was in the middle of the pandemic. So they're all
of course, when
jammed
no one
into
was
a conference
at an
room,
office,
taking
right.
COVID tests every 24 hours, trying to start the response to this. And fortunately, we had strong, deep relationships with outside counsel, longtime outside counsel, business advisors. And so this team was pulled together that was just incredible, that was already in place by the time I got to the office and started asking how I could help on Monday and Tuesday. So it kind of just went from there. And Jason, our GC, is a corporate securities lawyer by training and has done lots of things over his time in-house. But I said, look, I'm a litigator. I can help with all these things. He's like, do you really want to get involved with this? You don't, like, it's going to be big and for a long time. And I said, no, I do. because you can't sit by and watch something like this happen to a company that you're involved with and care about, and not try to do everything you can to help. So, so my litigation came back into the forefront. It was great because I'd done litigation for the first few years. I was at Fulbright before I specialized in employment litigation, and so I had a lot of
I can't imagine.
Big commercial case, big litigation type experience from early on.
So for those of us who are uninitiated in the IT world, just in sort of the simplest terms, what was actually, what happened on the IT side? What was the attack or the malware attack?
So it was the government, the U.S. government attributed it to the Russian SVR. I think that's pretty much without dispute. Nobody else has really made any other suggestions that it was someone else. The Russian SVR is the cyber part of the KGB. So the level of complexity of this attack suggests that they had hundreds of engineers working on it. And we think that our company was probably targeted because of its ubiquity. We had tons and tons of customers. In addition, we had a lot of government customers. So U.S. government and other governments around the world. So they... It took a long time to figure this out. It was not clear, but we were looking in our code, trying to figure out what was wrong with the code, and it turned out that they had actually gotten in to the system and then had infected the build process, which is like where the software gets compiled. This is stretching the limits of my technical knowledge, but that nobody had done that before. So it was truly unique and unprecedented. So.
And then you mentioned how many clients or customers did you have?
Somewhere in the range of 300,000. I mean, there's...
And so that has to have been part of the rationale for why they were attacking you,
it's all
potentially?
theory. They haven't told us.
Yeah, they haven't called you up and said. But so that, your software was attacked, and then that, by the nature, if your clients had uploaded it or done whatever you do with it.
There were several steps
sort of
that had to happen.
Yeah.
And the problem is we didn't know, and so we made the decision early on to try to be very transparent and to help the government, help our customers. And, we erred on the side of over-disclosure, which was anyone that was potentially impacted, which then was later distorted into this many people were impacted. And in fact, we didn't have that information. The customers had that, and the government potentially had it and wasn't telling us. So.
Oh. And so where do the issues related to the breach stand today?
So there were multiple pieces of litigation that were ultimately disposed of, multiple regulatory investigations globally. Really all that's left is a single case with the SEC that's pending in the Southern District of New York. And we had really kind of extraordinary success with our motion to dismiss and got about 90% of the case kicked out at that point. And so now we're waiting to file our motion for summary judgment a little bit later this spring.
So because this is an ethics hour,
Yes.
Let's dig in just a little bit just about your role at that time and what the role of the legal counsel was as y'all were going through this extraordinary attack. Things that people hadn't even had to deal with yet.
Yes.
That you were trying to figure that out. So I can't imagine all of the different things that were coming at you minute by minute, probably second by second at that point in time. So as you are thinking back on that, in your role as the lawyer at the time, kind of what hat are you wearing? Lawyer, advisor, kind of from an ethics legal perspective, what that looks like.
I mean, that's an issue for every in-house counsel. You don't have to be in the middle of a big crisis to worry about that because you're always in this sort of hybrid lawyer business advisor role, which is part of the reason I love in-house work so much is that you can, you're not just, if you're sitting in a firm and you're getting a phone call from a client, there's probably already a fire, and so you're the fireman. And when you're in-house, you can really try to resolve issues before they get to a serious legal problem, which is nice, but that means that you're giving business advice too. And so obviously when you have something significant going on, you're always thinking about attorney-client privilege and, is what you're talking about, writing, things like that, is that going to be privileged or not? And particularly in a crisis situation, you have to think very much about that. And again, our general counsel had brought in our outside counsel immediately, which is, a way to help with all of that, because then they were involved in everything. And outside counsel, there's not that concern. because they are obviously giving you legal advice. So that's one really critical point. I think anytime you're facing something like this is you need to have good outside counsel that you can trust and call upon immediately in order to help, in order to maintain privilege the way that you need to.
And so in those type of situations as a lawyer, to whom do you owe a duty?
Well, that's the interesting other thing about being in-house. When you're in a firm, you have a client, and it's all pretty clear. But in a company, you've got the board, you have individual officers that you report to and talk to and advise, and then you have employees. You have all these different constituencies, and you owe your duty to the company, which is like sort of an amalgamation of all those things, really. And so how do you figure that out? And you always have to kind of have in the back of your mind what is the right thing for the company, this sort of mythical entity that is all these things put together.
And then who are you advising?
You're advising individuals on what to do, that is best for the company in a perfect world. So, but that can be, that can mean that you're telling somebody you report to something that, is maybe not what they want to do. And so you have to explain, you have to be independent and explain, support your views, have a strongly reasoned position, and, present it and be able to defend it.
And then you talked a little bit about it, but just as you're figuring all of that out, from your role in this, who were your key partners in making those determinations and navigating all of those issues?
So we had one law firm, the DLA, that had represented the company for years and years, ever since Jason had become general counsel. And so they really helped with, because again, everybody from inside the company was really focused on the customers first, and trying to be sure that our customers were okay and reassuring them and getting them information. And so the outside law firm was able to sort of compile this external team that was so important. We needed cyber consultants, we needed crisis PR, all these different things to help us, and we needed it yesterday because this was all hitting the news and just the torrent of things coming in that had to be handled. We needed a huge team, and it was an amazing collaborative effort of both inside the company and outside, all working together.
And then you had mentioned just trying to determine privilege. And so as you are looking at just this massive amount of everything that was hitting you, like how did you manage document production? How did you determine what's privileged? Same question, a little bit different, but as you were working through all of those things.
So our cyber consultant had basically vacuumed up every document we had into a giant, it was, I don't remember the number of terabytes of data, but it was some gargantuan amount. And so that was all sitting there. And then as we got involved in different legal matters, we would pull parts of it into the relativity database, which I'm sure any of the lawyers on the phone know what that is. And searches would be run on that. And our outside counsel, we had more law firms involved in this than you can count, because different directors, our PE firm owners, all had their own counsel. We had multiple pieces of litigation. Initially, we had a class action, we had a derivative action, and we had this SEC investigation, which later turned into litigation. And all those matters had different lawyers that were specialists in those areas. And so we would have, lots of law firms to be dealing with. And you would just really have to get into the database and pull what was relevant to that matter, because it was all different. So discovery requests and all these different things that were all different. And so some of it, anytime you have a large electronic discovery effort, there's tiers of review. And so there's document review attorneys that do a first cut, and then it goes to maybe the associate team that's working on it from the firm. And then they would have to come to us eventually. They obviously had a list of outside counsel, but as we've talked about, not just because an outside or an in-house lawyer is on the communication, it doesn't make it privileged. So you have to look at the substance and see what were we doing in that communication. And it's sort of, it was nightmarish to see emails from years before my time when I was there, but colleagues that I knew and things that they'd, you always want to think about what you're putting in email. I'll say.
Yeah. Side note.
You never know what's going to come back.
A huge takeaway for everyone.
System,
so. If you learn nothing else from this ethics hour, be careful what you put in emails.
That's right. Business writing is a real thing.
Interesting comment just about all of the different lawyers and legal teams and firms that you had engaged from all of the different avenues. So from the SolarWinds, as sitting as legally representing SolarWinds, how did you manage, how do you manage all those other lawyers, and what do you, how did,
Very carefully.
what did that even look like? Yeah.
I mean, these are all, it was a whole lot of heavy hitters. And so everybody had an opinion. And it was a lot of delicate work to kind of synthesize that into one approach.
So talk about just some of the regulatory challenges, because that's part, I think that's a significant part of an in-house role. Oh, really anyone, but especially in-house. So how did you navigate? I'm certain there were probably, you found out there were some federal agencies or you didn't even know existed at the time. I mean, I can't even imagine what came at you from a regulatory
the ones
perspective.
that we were dealing with were pretty big.
Yeah.
So I was familiar with them.
And so how did you navigate that, sort of the regulatory side of all of this?
Again, we had a wonderful outside counsel team that was very experienced and knew a lot about these agencies. There's a lot of lawyers from those agencies who then go into firms after their career at the agency, and so they're very knowledgeable, and that kind of insight is invaluable, obviously. Regulatory investigations are interesting when you're a litigator, because I had not done, other than dealing with the EEOC and employment matters, I had really not dealt with large regulatory agencies. And so, when you're in discovery in a lawsuit, there's sort of limits to what somebody can ask, reasonableness. You can. There's always a judge you can go to, but when you're in a regulatory investigation, the agency is kind of the judge, and it's called an investigation, but it in our situation, it was unfortunately seemed sort of adversarial versus a search for the truth. I'll just be candid about that. Mm-hmm. And so, but there's nowhere to, you're sort of in this no man's land where you can't get a judge to say what's allowed and what's not, and what's too much and what's not. And so you just kind of have to be as transparent as possible, be as helpful as possible to the agency, and hope that they will get to the right result.
And so as you were working through all of that, I can't imagine the decision tree, just dealing with all of the things we've talked about. Mm-hmm. So kind of what was the decision tree structure, and how did you make sure that the general counsel's office or, the legal office was always in the room on those decisions? Or, was that a challenge, or were you always in the room? Kind of that.
It's always a little, there was so much happening initially that mm-hmm. I think, we were all feeling our way, outside counsel and the in-house team. And over time we got into a rhythm, and I think, I asserted myself a little bit at the beginning. I was like, hey, I did litigation. I know I know what I'm doing here. I want you to talk to me about what you're doing before you do it, kind of stuff. So, but we had a tremendous rapport. It was just it was a team effort. And I think if it had been anything less, we wouldn't have been able to get done what we had to get done. I mean, that first 6 months or so, literally the executives from our company were in a conference room for 6 months. It was a war room, and they were in there day and night for more than the first month. I mean, it was that intense. So
in the midst of COVID, taking COVID tests,
yes.
which is a whole other fascinating element of historical perspective.
So I was kind of in my office they were really working on the customer response almost more, and I was trying to help with the law firms and mm-hmm. navigating all of that stuff.
So did y'all already have a crisis plan in place? Did you trigger it? Was it ready to go? I'm certain there's been having to been adjustments to it, and plenty of things you had to kind of call
you always
the ball.
have a plan, but you never know until you actually are doing something.
Exactly.
And then it sort of takes on a life of its own, I think. But our general counsel was really kind of the captain, and coordinated all the different parts, and did an amazing job.
And I'm guessing there would have been a significant media component to this also. So was
yes.
Was the legal involved on the media side too?
Very involved. Yes, we read everything that went out the door. So because once it's out, it's out. So and we were just really trying to be very careful to only say what we knew. And there was so much at the beginning that was unknown. We had an internal investigation going on that was on the cyber front with all our InfoSec people and the engineers, really looking at combing through the code, all those other things. And then we also had a witness investigation where we were trying to figure out, how this had happened. There was even, there's potential for it was an insider job. We weren't, you didn't know. You're having to look at everything. And the government agencies were investigating at the same time. And so we were bending over backwards trying to help them and try to get to the bottom of it.
So what do you remember most looking back on it?
I think just the incredible commitment of the people. And it to me, I mean, the people that were in the company, you can kind of understand because it's our company. But I think the commitment from our outside law firms and vendors too was just incredible. Like they jumped in and they were working 24 hours a day almost too. So, and I think that anything less would not have gotten the job done. So it just is incredible to me that we got through it. That all of it got done.
And were there any significant takeaways, from a legal perspective, job perspective, work perspective, that you're like, careful what you put in emails, for example, is a good one. But anything like that you think back on from a legal perspective?
I mean, I have to say that even the people on the legal team who weren't involved because we kept it pretty small because it was so overwhelming, you couldn't do your day job if you were working on the sunburst attack. But everybody else in the legal department pulled together and did my day job, for me. And so it's just the importance of a team and being able to depend on the people around you. It's because you can't do anything by yourself. If there's anything sizable that happens, it takes it takes a village is a cliche, but it's true.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So then today, kind of getting, you're generally past, thankfully, most of that. So today, just from your role as, Vice President of Legal, if you could put your time into a pie chart, you're going to be having regulatory compliance, management, litigation, crisis management, all the things. What do you, probably every day is different is the answer. But, how would you allocate, kind of your role into a pie chart if you had to do that?
It really does change day to day. And that's one of the reasons I really like in-house practice so much is that there's so much variety. And especially since I moved beyond doing the employment law role, it's been a huge learning experience for me too. I've learned I'm very much a generalist these days, and we really try to get everybody in our department to be that way so that we can all handle anything is the goal. But I think, I spend a lot of time on the phone, a lot of time in meetings on the phone. We're global, and so we have lots and lots of Teams calls on video. I think the thing that I miss is having uninterrupted time to do work, because I end up doing so much communicating that it's hard to sometimes get the uninterrupted time to really think about something for an hour, that you need to really write something or come up with a new approach to a problem, things like that. And so it's a struggle to be proactive and not reactive. But I think that anyone in an in-house role will tell you that because it's very fast paced.
I think that's fair. I always like long airplane flights because no one can buy, that's,
yes.
Yeah.
I don't buy the Wi-Fi half the time, so I can just sit there and reduce down my inbox. It's great.
Yes, exactly. So you've talked to just about the importance of your outside counsel. Mm-hmm. And so what have you found are key points for managing those relationships and making sure you stay engaged on a really good front with your outside counsel?
I think, what I always tell them is I want to know more rather than less. And so, you're never bothering me. Nothing's too small. I like to be involved in decisions, partially because I'm a control freak and partially because I have a background in the things that I'm usually working on with them. And so I'd like to be a part of the process and shaping things. And so once we get that figured out and that sort of communication rhythm going, it usually goes very smoothly. We've just been so fortunate to have some really, really amazing outside counsel that are super good at what they do and know so much more about it than we ever could. We know the surface level stuff, and then they can go really deep, but they can educate you and help you make the decision along with them, mm-hmm. which is important, I think.
And so what do you at this point really enjoy the most about your work?
Getting to solve problems when they are not a big problem. So heading off problems, I think, is the most rewarding. And that's always, again, about communication. And so we're always trying to extend ourselves into the business where we can be more of a business advisor and less of somebody who's, a box to be checked at the end of the process. Oh, we got to go talk to legal about this. We try to really build relationships with everyone in the company so that we can kind of know what's going on in their area and help them spot things ahead of time. Because when it comes to us at the end of something and we have, an issue with an approach that's being taken, it's going to slow everybody down, and that makes everyone frustrated. So it's always better if we can get ourselves involved sooner, and that's really relationship driven.
And then conversely to that, what do you find most challenging in terms of the role today?
There's just never enough time to do what you want to do, what you need to do, and do it the way that you want to. So I always have to kind of, there's always something that's going to carry over to the next day that you thought had to be done, today. And I think then you start the next day thinking that's at the top of the list, and then you open up your email and see what happened across the world overnight, and it all changes. So
yeah, that is very true. So what does SolarWinds look like today? I mean, you had mentioned the number of customers at the time. Are you also sort of in that same?
I think so. I'm not up to date on the current, but I think it's pretty close. Yes. So even though we spun off our chunk of our company a few years ago, I think the number's not dissimilar. We've gone through a transformation in the last few years. We had back to the perfect storm category. We had our chief information officer, our chief technology officer, both left the company to take other positions in the months before the hack. So like October, November, before that happened. And then our CEO had announced he was resigning in September because again, the company was going to split apart and it was going to be a smaller company. And so, he was moving on for that reason. And literally, I think his last day was the 15th, I think, like days after the attack. It was the switchover.
Oh my gosh.
And so it may have been later. It may have been the first of the month. I can't remember. But our new CEO was coming in. The old one was going out, and all this happened. So it was lots and lots of new stuff going on top of the issues with the sunburst attack. And so our new CEO came in and put into place this approach called Secure by Design, where we resolved to try to really be the most secure software company we could be, and really learn from and help teach other people from what happened to us was really his goal. And I think that served us well. We also went through a business transformation where we changed our product line, and we're now observability is the name of our current product, and that's kind of the idea of pulling together a lot of the tools that we had that were single tools into I think the phrase is a single pane of glass, where you can see something across a lot of parts of your system in one place. And so that's kind of what we're doing now, and that appears to have been, we're getting traction on that. We were just again bought by a new PE company, or not yet, but we signed a deal, and the closing will be sometime in Q2 on great terms. And so that was very rewarding, I think, for everyone who's been involved in this Herculean effort to get through this difficult the fallout from the hack. To see that we kind of, it makes you feel a little bit like you've come out the other side, which was nice. And then having the legal complications die down too, and being down to this really one piece of litigation and a little piece of it left is also helped me kind of feel like I can breathe again.
I feel like Herculean is a good word for all of that. So then now at this point, kind of what issues or category of issues keep you up at night?
I sleep better than I used to. Not as much as keeping me up at night as it used to. It's always just I'm always thinking about what's coming the next day and what did I not get done and what I need to do the next day. But in general, to do this kind of work, I think you have to be able to compartmentalize, and so I try to do that. My family might disagree. Kind of have your phone attached to you a lot of the time, but I try to turn it off.
Yeah, and that's fair. So speaking to the law students that are in the room, and if there's any online, kind of what do you wish you would have known when you were at Texas Law, looking back?
I had no idea what my future would be like, I have to say. I didn't think about much more beyond just getting a job, I think, right out of the gate. Interestingly, I do think that when I took a job at a firm like Fulbright, in my head, I always thought, oh, I'll work there for a couple of years maybe, and then I'll go in-house. That sounds like that might be interesting. So I think that part of it maybe I thought about, but I didn't really think about practicing law and having a family and how to balance all of that kind of stuff. And I think, I mean, you can't anticipate it, I guess. I mean, I would, you know, I think that you just have to try to kind of do what's right for you in the moment. And I have been lucky enough to reinvent myself many times over the last 20 years as a lawyer. And so I think, and it was all based on relationships. So along the way, really more than I don't know if I applied for any of the jobs that I have had. I'm trying to think if they were all relationship based and contacts that I had. So I think, yeah, just getting to know people, doing your best work when you can, when you're working. And for me, it was knowing when to take breaks too, because I would be trying to weigh kind of what was going on with my kids, how I felt about that, how they were doing, just how the balance at home was going in general, and made conscious decisions multiple times to just stop. And I didn't know what I would do next. And I just, but every person's different. And so I think that, some people may not look at the situation the same way and feel like they need to take a break. But for me, that worked well. And I think you just have to be willing to listen to your heart, talk to your family about how everybody's doing and figure out what's right in the moment, and then trust that it'll come together again if you're doing the right thing for the moment. That's just sort of, that was all I could do, I think. And so I feel very fortunate that it's all come out so well. And I'm really, really grateful for the SolarWinds role, because that came at a time very unexpectedly, but when my kids were older. And so my youngest started driving about the time I got promoted. And that was like a different life all of a sudden, where you're not worried about getting little people where they need to go, and they're just much more independent. And I felt like I could really start focusing on work in a way that I hadn't been able to for the 20 years before that. So I guess I never thought, I would not have thought when I was a student that in your middle age that you could really be kind of just hitting your stride with work. But that's kind of how it's worked out for me, and it's great. I'm enjoying it tremendously.
I definitely appreciate the focus, and I think you show the importance of just building those relationships and building those networks, even from early on. I mean, a lot of yours was just early in your legal career, but how it has impacted you throughout your legal career and the importance of that, and identifying, I guess, who those mentors are and who those people, who you can rely on.
Yep.
So.
Well, mentoring is a huge part of it, and I think there's formal and informal mentoring, and I know that the law school still has its wonderful program, and hopefully all the students in the room are using that and getting to know lawyers while you're a student, because you can't ever get too much advice. I think it's just always good to learn from people that are ahead of you.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, and a good plug for the mentorship program. That is such a great thing here. We can take some questions, so if there's anyone in the room that has questions, or Valerie, if we have anything online, nothing online. Any questions from anyone in the room?
Hello. Okay.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I have a very basic question. What were your favorite classes in law school, and what classes do you think have helped your career the most?
Two very different things. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about, I don't know, what year are you?
I'm a 2L.
You're a 2L, okay. I don't mean to be discouraging about all the work you're doing in law school, but you're not really learning anything about being a lawyer. That's what I would tell you here. It's all on the job training. I mean, you're learning how to think and write and reason through things, but so I mean, in that sense, all of them help you in your career. My favorite, I mean, I didn't take employment. I know we have employment law classes still, I think, but I didn't take anything like that. I didn't know that was what I was going to ultimately get into as sort of a specialization.
Yeah.
I took a lot of just CivPro, clinic type stuff related to litigation. I really loved my federal tax class, which had nothing to do with my practice. It had everything to do with the professor. a guy named Professor Evans, who I think went to NYU sometime soon after our time here, but or somewhere else. But to me, the relationships with the professors and the resonating with the professors made every class fun. Professor Johansson, I loved Wills and Estates. I didn't take that till I was a third year. I mean, if I'd taken it as a second year, I probably would have tried to clerk in that area. So I mean, I loved the classes for the class that it was versus what I would, because you don't know when you're taking it, what you're going to do and what you're going to use later. Contracts was my hardest first year class, and just basic contract principles pop up all the time, and I hear Professor Weintraub in my head because he had a very particular manner of speaking and just was a funny, really dry, funny professor. So our torts professor, David Anderson, would sing to us with his guitar, so that was awesome. And I really loved John Robertson, who was my criminal law professor, but I've never done anything with criminal law. So I think it's just, it was an amazing experience. You just develop your mind more in law school than I ever felt like I was doing in college. So it's kind of the purpose of the school, I think, and the process.
I think that's fair. An online question?
Yes. Does the company have a legal ethics or compliance attorney on staff or a business person who serves in that role?
That would be me. I mean, I basically own the code of conduct and get involved in all sorts of compliance issues. A lot of them have to do with employment law. There's regulatory requirements around that. We have, there's also product regulatory requirements, and those are handled by some people on our InfoSec team, but I partner with them very closely. But really any sort of policy or rule or, you know, a lot of internal policy too, I'm involved with. And bigger companies do have people that are, you know, a chief compliance officer or something like that, but we're not that big. So one of the things I really like about my job is all the variety, and I have my finger in a lot of different pots, and it's fun.
It's been anything we didn't ask you. You know, anything you think maybe I should have thought of that. I like the message today of your path, that it wasn't linear, and how you can really, you know, reinvent yourself, but also find your passion in a lot of different ways, and the many different ways you've been able to do that. I think that's a really cool story, and that's one of the things that I think is awesome about your resume and your bio and your LinkedIn. And, you know, I think that's a really good lesson for law students, but for all of us, frankly.
I guess the one other thing that I would mention is I do think that something that a lot of us in the profession could do better at is providing on-ramps for lawyers who have taken time off. I've been fortunate to kind of find my own through relationships, but I also now try to, you know, if we have a job, we have a UT Law alum who was out of the practice for probably 15 years raising a family, and we needed somebody to help us manage our SEC litigation, and the GC that I work with is also very passionate about this, and we got her to come back and work with us and manage our litigation. She'd been a litigator for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years before she had kids, and then was out, and it's hard to find those openings. And so I think if you have an opportunity, if you're in a position to hire, if you can think about, you know, the school day is long, and there's some people who've been sidelined who have a lot of time, I think that they could give and really be productive, and that's a passion of mine. I think it's neat to do.
I think that's very fair, because sometimes what you're navigating in your private life or personal life is as complex as anything you can do in terms of the practice of law, or, you know, anything else in a working relationship. So you're just kind of trading those skills. But the people that are doing those things at home are staying sharp, just doing something different. I think that's a really good point. So any other questions for us? Oh, yeah.
Where's the company headed? Obviously, you're a big presence in Austin and contribute a lot to the local Austin economy and otherwise. Where's the company headed now in terms of the change in ownership formation and all?
So we are, when the deal is signed, we'll be taken private. And so we will no longer be a publicly traded company, but we'll still be in all the same places. And we've been owned by 2 PE firms for the last 8 or 9 years. And so we don't expect a lot to change, quite honestly. I mean, PE firms obviously get involved to create value, and then, you know, realize the value of their investment down the road after they've increased your value. So, you know, they're not our owner yet, but I'm assuming that, you know, they would be headed like any other PE firm to some sort of, you know, sale or IPO or something like that down the road.
All right. Well, we will stop there. It was a pleasure. Becky, thank you so much
Good
for
to see
being
you,
here today.
Jennifer.
Thank you for sharing your career history and what I find is a really fascinating story about SolarWinds. I learned a lot reading what you sent me and then having the conversation today. So thanks for Becky for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for you all online. If you are looking for your ethics CLE, you will get that information from us from where you registered. And don't forget to sign if you're here. And thanks for being here, everyone. Have a great day.